Joining us now for more on today's executive action, NBC's Julia Ainsley, along with Alan Orr, an immigration attorney and former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Cornell Belcher, a Democratic strategist and pollster, and Tim Miller, host of the Bulwark podcast and former communication director for Jeb Bush in 2016. So, Julia, first, can you just explain who exactly qualifies for this and the potential impact?
Well, Anna, I just got to meet one of those people who will qualify for this, someone who came to this country at 3 years old and has DACA. A lot of these people might have DACA, but as you know, the fate of DACA has so often been up in the air year after year as the Trump administration tried to unroll it. It might not get through in the courts. They think this offers them something more secure if they can get on a pathway to citizenship. I just got to speak to Javier Quiroz Castro. He's a nurse in a critical care unit in a hospital in Houston. Here's what he told me.
An action like this has been way overdue. People said the same thing about DACA, that it wasn't necessary, that it was overstepping. And DACA has turned out to be a very successful program. So I don't see it as a bad thing. In fact, I see it as life-changing in a positive way for hundreds of thousands of families and people. America is going to be stronger because of this.
Javier says he married his high school sweetheart. He's been in the United States since he was 3 years old. But he and his wife worried that if he left the country to apply for citizenship, which would be required before this action goes into effect, they were worried he might be separated from them for years or might not ever get back into the country.
Julia, this is an executive action, as we mentioned, not legislation. So does that mean if Donald Trump wins in November, he could just undo all of this?
Very easily, much like he tried to undo DACA. Of course, the courts ultimately kept DACA in place, but it could be undone. That's for another conversation. The one thing that makes this more secure, though, Anna, is that if these people like Javier can get on that pathway to citizenship, it would be much harder for a legal challenger, a future administration, to come in and take away their green cards. They could say perhaps people who haven't applied yet wouldn't be eligible. But once someone is on their pathway to citizenship, has something like a green card in their hand, that gets a lot harder to take away.
And Alan, we mentioned that one source characterized this as the biggest thing since DACA. Is that how you see it? And if somebody were to walk into your office today, a client asking for your advice, what do you tell them?
So it is the biggest thing since DACA because it's something that's actually happening. And I already have a number of clients who are waiting for something to happen that will get relief now under this new program. I think it's a little bit just like DACA. So individuals who apply and the process starts and the legal challenges start, if they're already in the process, it'll be very difficult to take that benefit back away from them.
Cornell, it comes just a few weeks after President Biden announced this other executive action to crack down on illegal border crossings. The Wall Street Journal reports today that, quote, the president's advisors have thought for months that to avoid further angering immigration advocates and Latino voters with family members lacking a legal status, new border restrictions ought to be paired with a sweetener to benefit longtime immigrants already living in the U.S. Do you think today's move strikes the right balance?
Well, look, I think it's good policy. And look, I mean, as that interview showed, this is going to, impact the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in a positive way. And so the president is trying to solve for the problem with the executive action earlier, and along with this one, he's trying to solve for the problem that, as you know, and we've reported on here, that Republicans did not want to solve for. They did not want to do immigration reform, so he's trying to solve for the problem. So sometimes good policy does make for good politics, and I think this is good policy that's needed. Again, it's going to change the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, but it's also to those voters out there, both who are sort of on the left and upset about immigration reform. I think it does speak to them that president's fighting and trying to do something, but also in the middle of the electorate with those moderate voters. Again, you have the contrast here with the president trying to solve for the problem. It's not perfect, but he's trying to solve for the problem, while his opponent is clearly trying not to solve for the problem, but use it politically. I think it's good policy and good politics.
Tim, NBC News reported earlier this month that Latino voters specifically have been frustrated with the Biden administration. They want tougher border control and help for immigrants. And a growing number of them tell pollsters that Trump would do a better job. So do these two moves by President Biden even the score, perhaps?
I don't know about even the score, but they're absolutely needed. And I think it's important because the president and the Democrats have a much tougher challenge on immigration to message it to these voters, right? Because as you mentioned, Hispanic voters, most voters in the electorate really do want a secure border, also do want compassion and do want us to be a welcoming country. That means that the Biden administration has to do both to appeal to them, right? It's easy to do the Trump message to say no illegal immigrants, strong border, mass deportations. Like his message isn't nuanced at all. It's a blunt instrument. Biden has to be nuanced to appeal to his broader coalition that Cornell just mentioned. So I think that it's very important to do both. It's also noteworthy that he's seen some positive progress on this. There's just a report out today that we've had a record low number of border crossings this past month in May. And so I think that's a good sign and something that the White House is going to be able to tout. So I think pairing both these two things together is important politically. I think they're both good policy, but even if you didn't like one of the policies politically, you need to work together in both strong border and, being reasonable and rational to people who have been in this country since they were 3 years old.
We were just looking at pictures of demonstrators related to DACA. And of course, Alan, those DACA recipients have lived in limbo for the last 12 years as they've seen legal challenge after legal challenge. Do you think that's where this is headed?
It may be heading in that direction, but I think one of the things that we should remind people of is that Ronald Reagan was the standard Republican, the bear liner, who said that we should reward people who add to our economy, who have been here for a long time. He was the last Republican that sort of stood and said, I recognize the value of individuals who came here, who have these equities, been here a long time, came here as children that should sort of come through. I would like to distinguish between the two executive orders from the president. One executive order categorically denies asylum after a certain number is reached. In this case, we're looking at something on a case-by-case analysis. When you categorically do something, which they saw DACA did, that's why it had the challenges that it has today, and it has not been resolved in the court. Whereas bans have already been resolved by the court and will not stand. So these are two different types of order and a stretch of the executive power because our Congress is not doing what they need to do for the American people.
Cornell, a recent poll showed 62% of Americans would favor a new national program to deport all undocumented immigrants living in the United States. That includes 38% of Democrats and more than half of Hispanics specifically. You talk about good policy being good politics, but when you look at those numbers, could today's move backfire on President Biden?
Well, I'd like the ability to see through walls and fly, but that's just not realistic. And again, like my friend on the right said, look, you got to be rational and reasonable. We're not going to deport all people in this country illegally. That's not reasonable. So we got to have an adult in the room conversation about how do we fix this system that's broken, and how do we put together, reach across the aisle and try to get Congress to actually act. And when Congress won't act, the president has to take action that he can. Reasonable action. There's a lot of things that American public actually might want, but it's no way possible to sort of, take all these people who've been living in this country a long time out. That's just not reasonable. It won't make for good policy. I think there's a middle ground here, and I think the president's trying to aim for that middle ground.
Tim, just this morning, the Trump campaign sent out an email that was, I guess, predictable, saying everyone who crosses the border illegally is handed a ballot with every Democrat's name filled in. I mean, that's barely believable, but some people might buy it. Is it a worthy investment for the Biden campaign to try to combat claims like that and convince the people who believe them they're untrue, or have they written off people who would believe something like that anyway?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's up to the media. I know we can have a lot of hope for our friends at Fox, et cetera, but it's up to the media to spread the truth about this. Obviously, illegal people that are here illegally can't vote. in federal elections, at least. And, I think that it's really the job of the Biden campaign to point out the extremism of Trump and the right on this issue. And I think this is a challenge. Sometimes the Democrats are a little afraid to engage on this issue because of the polls that you referenced in the previous question. But as much as generically speaking, people are for deporting undocumented immigrants, when you put faces on this, they are not for it. Like, people are not for deporting somebody that came here as a 3-year-old who doesn't speak Spanish, who's never been to their home country, who's married to their high school sweetheart, who didn't commit any crimes. Like, the American people don't want that person deported. And Donald Trump has said, as recently when he was on Fox the other day, he was like, yeah, we're going to deport a lot of criminals. And there might be one sympathetic mother who didn't do anything, but that's what we're going to have to do to be tough. I think that's a losing message for Trump, and the Biden campaign should be focusing on his more extreme statements on this and trying to, as Cornell said, take the big middle on this issue.